Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I was at a conference last week and was really very impressed with the opening keynote speaker, Doug Stevens, who is the founder of an organization called Retail Profit, was the speaker. And he is, I think, one of the world's foremost retail industry futurists. His intellectual work and thinking has influenced, I think, many widely known international retailer agencies and brands. He's worked with Walmart and Google and Estee Lauder, BMW and LVMH. And he's got this consulting firm that advises retailers, grocers, shopping centers, shopping malls, etc., on what they need to do. And one of the most interesting things that he talked about was last week, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but probably a lot more, was that malls are no longer just places for stores. They're places that are almost like entertainment centers and hospitality centers. I found that really fascinating. Doug, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, Brian. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
My pleasure. So tell me, people are worried about internet sales and shopping online. Is the future of retail terrible, or is it still alive and well?
It's different. let's put it that way. It's certainly different. And you referenced the shopping center, and it's a great place to start, because I think in many ways it kind of highlights the fundamental differences. If we go back to the genesis of what we know today to be the suburban mall, the first one was built in Edina, Minnesota, and it was built in 1956. This was the first covered indoor shopping center, much like what we see around us today. At that time, of course, there was the huge migration to the suburbs that was taking place, many Americans and Canadians moving out of urban centers into the suburbs. The shopping center was really a construct designed to do two things: to bring an enormous level of convenience to the average suburban dweller by putting all of these amazing stores and department stores and brands all under one roof that was within a short drive, usually, from their home. On the other hand, it was really designed to be a bit of a cultural point, sort of the center of the community, a gathering place. If we go back to Roman times, we find the same thing with the city square or the agora. So it was designed to have this kind of cultural purpose, a place to spend quality time, either with your family or friends. And that really served the consumer for decades, and it really was sort of the height of convenience and very central to many communities. I mean, you and I are probably approximately the same age, although I'm probably older than you. But, I think back to my own childhood and my teenage years, and the mall was a really important part of growing up. It's where you spent an awful lot of time. Anyway. To hang out, to loiter. It was an acceptable level of loitering. Well, flash forward to today. So let's now put that under the microscope. It is no longer considered convenient to have, 50 or 100 retailers in one location, when anything and everything we want in practically on Earth can be shipped to us and delivered to our door in a day or two. Amazon today carries 500 million products, about 80% of which can be shipped to you within a few days free of charge. So the commercial utility of the shopping center certainly is no longer what it used to be. And when we look at the cultural significance, if I think about, the idea of getting together with friends and potentially, sparking up relationships with new folks, that's happening today on Facebook. It's happening on Instagram. It's happening on TikTok, And even the entertainment aspects of the shopping center, the idea that, oh my gosh, there's a movie theater and there's a food court, all of that, for the most part, has been usurped by the internet. So we're in a place today, and I think that this is part of what I hope will be an awakening for shopping centers, is that you don't fix a shopping center by adding slightly nicer fixtures and finishes or, adding a few new merchants. We have to address the fact that the commercial and cultural significance of the shopping center is no longer. its competition is no longer the shopping center down the street or the department store in the center of the city. Their competition today is Netflix, it's YouTube, it's Facebook, it's every single digital media outlet and the convenience that the internet provides. And so, to my mind, there is one ray of hope for shopping centers, and that is that they have space and they have the capacity to generate audiences. And audiences are certainly what brands are looking for. Brands want large audiences of consumers that they can connect with and they can build relationships with. And consumers are hungry for experiences. They're hungry for the things that they can't get online. The once one of a kind entertainment that malls could potentially provide. So in essence, malls are no longer in the commercial real estate industry. Whether they like it or not, they're in the entertainment, media, and content delivery business. And that is a very different kind of activity. It's not just about building, managing, and leasing space anymore. It's about creating content that consumers are interested in. It's about creating memorable moments that they can be a part of and giving them, once again, a reason to put down the laptop, put down the tablet, get in the car, and go somewhere to enjoy something that they can't get anywhere else. That's a real shock to the system of a lot of shopping center companies because of these decades of kind of status quo management of these centers.
Yeah, it's a huge shock. And I can see what you're saying in regards to sort of the Class A space. And in the Toronto area, you'd think about Yorkdale or the Eden Centre or Sherway or Square One or something like that. But the secondary shopping malls, I got to ask you, how do they meet your objective? And then what about shopping centers that are just strips with maybe a grocery anchor, but don't have any of the things that you get in an Eaton Centre or Yorkdale? And then I guess the final question, what about power centers that really aren't connected at all, or just parking lots with a bunch of buildings spread out around them?
Yeah. So I would put it this way. If we look at the landscape today, it's safe to say that every form of retail that has ever existed from the beginning of time, right from the barter economy through to the grand marketplaces and bazaars, flea markets, department stores, independent merchants, high streets, main streets, all of it exists today to some level. Now, are there as many flea markets and marketplaces as there used to be? Of course not. The St. Lawrence market in Toronto is a good example of a market that has survived, partly because of its natural dynamism, partly because of its location. But it is an experience. It's a cultural experience to go to the St. Lawrence market. And the same could be said of many markets that still exist today around the world. There are many fewer department stores, but the ones that have survived, the Selfridges of the world, we can point to and say, because that too is an experience. So it's not to say that any form of retail is necessarily going to become completely extinct. I don't believe that will be the case, but there will be far fewer shopping centers, right? We just simply don't need the level of shopping centers that we once had because we have so many options today in terms of how we buy things. But the strongest will survive, and the strongest shopping centers will not be the ones that happen to have a nicer Aritzia or a Lululemon or a Rainforest Cafe, or even the Pradas of the world and other luxury players. The shopping centers that ultimately survive, in my opinion, are going to be those that fully embrace the idea that they are essentially entertainment houses now. Now they have to produce the content, not just look to their retailers to be the draw. For decades in retail, we talked about the anchor tenant, that one tenant that would drive the bulk of your traffic. And I have a friend in the commercial real estate business who owns shopping centers, and he's maybe one of the enlightened, but he said, what I've realized, Doug, is that the only anchor that the shopping center has ultimately is the shopping center. It is the anchor. It needs to be the reason that people come to the center in the first place. And, the power center, again, I think that there's a place in the world for the power center. But if we're being honest, the power center, the conception of the power center was probably a product of one of the periods that we went through as a society of true hyper consumerism. When did we decide that a hardware store need not anymore look like the local hardware store, but needs to be a 300,000 square foot concrete behemoth somewhere in the suburbs? I guess it was around the same point in time when families said, we don't want to raise 3 kids in a bungalow that's 1,000 square feet. Now everybody needs a 3,000 square foot, 5-bedroom house, with 4 bathrooms and that sort of thing. So we went through a period as a society of true hyper consumerism where really all that mattered was access to the stuff. We just needed more and more and more things and access to them. The Power Center was a response to that. The Power Center said, hey, listen, if you don't want a great shopping experience, come to us, because we've got a dusty concrete box in the suburbs that you can shop in. It's called Home Depot. And we flocked there through the 80s and 90s. But it too is starting to wane now as more and more consumers come over to the idea that, hey, listen, I can get the product anywhere. I can have the product delivered to me. What I need inspiration for my project. Maybe I need some education on how to do my project.
Well, that's one of the things that some of the power centers did and did well. Home Depot would have their little seminar space and provide the how-to seminars. And you had, I think, the same thing at some of the other big box. You got your Genius Bar at some of the electronic stores, and so you could get potentially more service, more explanation, more how-to seminars in some that would be cost effective. And then also you felt like you were shopping where the contractors shopped. And so therefore you thought that maybe you were actually getting, wholesale deals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot of that went by the wayside, for 2 reasons, I think. First and foremost, the ongoing search for profitability among these companies, and the things we've just described, having seminars and education series and classes. Those things obviously are a weight on profitability. So there's that. As it applies to Home Depot, however, there was also a bit of a revolution between generations. Baby boomers, myself included, we grew up watching our parents paint the living room or wallpaper the kitchen or fix an electrical problem. Our kids today, I don't think, have the same experience. I think today it's a generation that would like things to be done for them. And I'm not levying any judgment on that. It's a choice. They would rather pay to have someone do the electrical work or wallpaper the kitchen, whatever the case may be. So Home Depot and others have moved away from this idea of do it yourself, and they're moving more toward do it for me, right? So they really and truly are, to a greater extent, serving contractors. And I think that's partly responsible for some of the problems that Lowe's has been having in Canada in terms of sales. But generally speaking, I guess, and this sort of frames it up nicely, is that we have to appreciate that shopping concepts are a response to societal change. The move away from Main Street to shopping centers and shopping centers to power centers and power centers to the internet, all of these things are a progression and an evolution based on societal change. The shopping center as we know it today fundamentally hasn't changed since the 1950s. Now, point to one other thing in the world that hasn't changed since the 1950s, and it kind of highlights the problem that they find themselves in today.
What a fascinating conversation about the future of retail. We're chatting tonight with Doug Stevens, the Retail Prophet. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back with more in just 2 minutes. I'm going to ask Doug a little bit about internet sales. I'm going to ask him about what's the anchor, and I'm going to ask him about the future of main streets, high streets. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight about retail and the future of retail with Doug Stevens, who is the founder of an organization called Retail Profit. Prior to founding his consultancy, Retail Profit, Doug spent over 20 years in the retail industry, holding senior international leadership roles. He's the author of 3 best-selling books called Resurrecting Retail, The Future of Business in a Post-Pandemic World, Reengineering Retail, The Future of Selling in a Post-Digital World, and The Retail Revival, Reimagining Business for the New Age of Consumerism. He sits on numerous different corporate boards and academic advisory boards. I had the honor of hearing him speak at a conference just a week ago. And you really set the scene, Doug, for an excellent conference because I think you challenged everyone about the shopping centers and the retail concepts that it had. And so I thank you for that opening address. You had a chart that you put forward in regards to internet sales, and I think I've seen similar charts from other organizations that suggested that there was sort of this trajectory of online sales, the percentage of retail sales being purchased via the internet, that was on a trajectory up, but it grew dramatically in the pandemic, obviously, but that in the United States it was almost back down to trend line, as if the impact of the pandemic on online sales had sort of come and gone. In Canada, it hadn't gone yet. It had gone up, and it's come down, but it hasn't gone down to where it was. What do you think the future and the future growth of internet sales is going to be?
Yeah, good point. So no question. I mean, the pandemic was obviously anomalous in its impact on all kinds of different industries, but certainly no exception being retail. I would explain the difference in the two countries. I mean, our response, obviously, when we're shut down, we're locked in, we can't go out, stores are closed. Obviously, we scrambled and we got the things we needed, or we attempted to, by getting them online. In the US, I would argue that more retailers, let's say more retailers broadly, were equipped to meet consumers online to begin with. I would say that more merchants, certainly more chains, specialty chains, and obviously big box retailers like Walmart and others, perfectly equipped to serve customers through online sales. In Canada, I would say less so. I would say that certainly the big retailers, yes, but the average merchant on the street, probably not quite as capable. But they got capable, and they got capable in a hurry because it was really the only means of doing any meaningful business at all. And so I think that to some extent explains the difference in trend lines between the two countries. You're absolutely right. Online shopping has subsided as consumers have gone back out to physical stores, and we've craved sort of the in-person shopping experience. In Canada, however, I think that we've kind of finally perhaps embraced the idea of online sales widely across our retail constituencies. And so we're not seeing the same sort of dip, because I think finally Canadians are able perhaps to order more things online. I mean, take Loblaws, for example. Yeah, it literally took a pandemic for Loblaws to get into online grocery sales in a meaningful way. And I'm sure that some consumers today are saying, hey, I kind of liked being able to pull up and just grab my order as opposed to going through the store. In general, though, I would say that, we have to, the story of online sales has been sort of the analogous to the old adage about the frog in a pot of water. And the heat gets turned on, the stove gets turned on, and the frog just sits there feeling like, yeah, it's getting a little bit warmer, but it's okay. It's okay. Eventually, the water starts to boil. Where we've gone with online sales is that from the beginning, I heard merchants out there saying, yeah, online is convenient, and sure, there's going to be a small percentage of sales that go online, but people are still going to want to shop in stores. They said that when online was 2% of retail. They said it when it was 6%, 8%. Today, on average, it's about somewhere between 15 and 20%. And you still have retailers that are leaning on this idea that stores are going to be, enduring until the end of time. But what happens when we hit the point, as China did during the pandemic, where all of a sudden online is 51% of sales? Now, what do you do?
You
Now,
actually think it could get up to 50% of sales?
I think eventually it could. I think that we are sort of at the end of the beginning of online. I think that the beginning of real online shopping began with Amazon sort of making sense of the chaos that was the online retail market. They brought order to it, they brought a systematic approach to it, and they brought a level of trust to it, where all of a sudden we weren't terrified to put our credit card number into a screen. That was sort of, in my mind, the beginning. We're at the end of the beginning now. And we're starting already to talk about things like automated grocery replenishment. There were a tremendous number of products in our lives, as I'm sure, is the case in your household too, Brian, where we're not going to the grocery store every week and sitting there and hemming and hawing over which kind of toilet tissue to buy, right? We know the brand, we know the quantity, we go in and we grab it. And the same applies to about 80% of the products in our lives. They don't require a lot of consideration or shopping. And companies are already, and Amazon in particular, is saying, well, if you buy that product all the time, and we have means of calculating your usage, the rate of usage, why don't we just get you on a subscription and we'll send that stuff to you when you need it? So if you imagine a world where all of a sudden, a greater and greater percentage of the products you order every week, month, whatever, are coming to you automatically. You're not having to go shop for those things anymore. All of a sudden, that 15 to 20% e-commerce could very quickly rise to be something much greater. So I don't think it's inconceivable that at some point, maybe 20, 30 years down the road, who knows? But at some point, it's not inconceivable that we cross the threshold of the 50% line.
My gosh, that's going to have a huge impact on shopping centers, shopping malls, retailers, power centers, et cetera. That's really something else. Let me ask you. I think you also said in your presentation that people come to return products at bricks and mortar shopping centers and actually end up buying more than they return. I found that interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it can be the case. Returns certainly are an important part of retail, and making sure that the return process is efficient is an important part. And yeah, it's true that every time a consumer sets foot in a store, wise retailers look at that as an opportunity to sell something, and it truly is. I could step back and look at a strategy that was unveiled by Kohl's department stores in the US a few years ago, where they announced that they were moving into a partnership with Amazon to actually facilitate the return of Amazon products for consumers. That you could go to a Kohl's store, bring in whatever you ordered from Amazon, plunk it down on the counter, and they would look after getting that back to Amazon for you. The obvious play on that, the strategy behind that was, hey, if we can get a customer in the door, who cares why they're here? If we can return this product efficiently, maybe they'll buy 2 or 3 things when they're here as well. The physical store, though, to my mind, the real true purpose of the physical store going forward is this. I don't think, if we look at a brand like Nike, today Nike sells about 50% of all of its products direct to consumer. They don't go through another retailer. It's not through a department store. And in an increasing way, they're moving out of shopping centers. They're building their own stores, and they're selling a lot of stuff online. So Nike really doesn't have much need to be in a shopping center. What all brands, however, are still looking for are new customers, a means of acquiring new customers and generating really great positive brand impressions. So for me, the value of the physical store is less as a means of distribution of products, and it's more a means today of distribution of great experiences and a means of customer acquisition. Where rent used to be the cost of sales, it is now becoming the cost of customer acquisition. Part of the rationale behind that is that the cost of acquiring consumers today through digital media has become astronomically expensive. particularly through the pandemic. We saw the media rates, what they call the cost per thousand clicks or impressions through digital media was just absolutely exponentially escalating, to the point where some brands can no longer afford incremental customers through digital media. As it turns out, in some weird twist of fate, physical stores are proving to be an economically efficient means of garnering really meaningful consumer impressions for your brand. And that's why Nike is still building stores. Not because they need stores to distribute their products, but they need stores to distribute great experiences to consumers that shine well on the brand and can actually cause even greater sales happening online. To the point, if there was a study done not that long ago that if a consumer goes into a full-blown Nike flagship store, what they call their house of innovation, and then later goes and shops online, it's been proven that the consumer will spend 30% more simply because they had that experience at Nike prior to shopping online. So there's a true media value now to physical retail. So in a weird sort of way, to sum the whole thing up, we live in a world today where media, usually in the palm of my hand, has become the store. It's an easier place to shop. I get better information and I have access to a wider variety of products. This is the store, and physical stores are becoming a really important and stealthy, in some cases, form of media where you can connect with consumers. So it's kind of Alice through the looking glass. You know, the whole world is kind of reversed around retail.
You know, that's fascinating. And I think about, you pointed at your iPhone. The Apple stores are really interesting. I would have thought that, an Apple, a Macintosh, an iPhone are got to be one of those things that you can buy on the phone. But those Apple stores are really interesting. They are very approachable. They have a very different way of doing the check-in, the check-out, et cetera. How do you explain what they're doing?
So Apple's a perfect example. And frankly, insiders in the retail industry have been pointing to Apple as the benchmark for decades. Apple's stores were really, in many ways, they were the physical manifestation of the brand's battle cry. Because at its inception, Apple was really the anti-status quo brand. It was the anti-IBM, the anti-Microsoft, the anti-PC. And they were leading sort of not just a consumer segment that was tired of those products and brands, but they were leading almost a movement that was like, defy the status quo, become an Apple user. And in the same way, when they looked at their physical stores, I think they really did the same. They took the same philosophical approach. Let's not build a store that looks like a Radio Shack or looks like a Best Buy. Let's build a place that really defies the status quo. So what do? Well, you say, let's take all these super expensive products and let's put them out on tables for consumers to use, for them to try and play with and experiment with. Most retailers would say, I'm not going to take $50,000 or more. Good Lord, who knows how much the inventory value is on an Apple sales floor. I'm not going to take that and put it all at risk by having consumers pawing it and breaking it and that sort of thing. Apple said, no, how else are you going to experience the magic of the product unless you had it in your hand? They said, most places you struggle to get any sort of decent advice from somebody. No, not at Apple. We're going to have a bar where you can sit down and talk to someone who has this higher level of expertise. And we're not going to charge you a dime to do that. We're going to give that service to you. We're going to have classes and lectures and seminars, and we'll give you a concierge level of service. And the whole thing was a defiance of what the norm was in their category. And today, hey, Apple I think a significant portion of Apple's sales actually do happen online, but their stores are like cathedrals to the brand. They're really a living, breathing billboard for the Apple experience. And I I think intellectually, most retailers kind of get that. When you explain that to them, they get it. But you have to have the fortitude to invest in those concepts, to manage them to very high standards, and to continue to do them over the fullness of time, because these things aren't always things that you can draw straight lines to profitability with. Having a Genius bar, does that really contribute to our sales? Well, who knows? But it makes our customers happy that we have that service. And so we're going to continue to do that. You have to have that intestinal fortitude in retail to do these things and stick with them long enough to see the results. And most retailers don't have that kind of steady hand.
Cathedral to their product. I love that description. I used to be someone involved in the cosmetics business when infomercials were big, and they would describe that the infomercials gave you information, awareness, but they didn't give you the trial. And you needed to have the bricks and mortar store, Sephora, Ultra, etc., that people would go into to try the product. And then they would continue buying online potentially, or through the infomercial toll-free number. And so therefore they said there was huge synergy between the infomercial online and the bricks and mortar. Do you think that's the case? Is that what you're describing, is that you got to be in the different segments? You can't analyze the profitability or sales on just one segment. There is this synergy between them?
I think so. I mean, can you be a pure play online retailer today and do well? It's a struggle. I mean, if we're being completely honest, it's a struggle. Amazon took decades to get to a point where it was running a profitable e-commerce operation. And frankly, were it not for other businesses within the business, like Amazon Web Services, their huge data arm, they probably wouldn't be generating even nearly the kind of profit that they generate today. So there is an argument to some extent that even if you're heavily into e-commerce, to have physical locations where consumers can perhaps try things, to your point, or return things in a more economical and efficient way. There are those that are of the mind that that's almost an essential piece of being an e-commerce player now, is to have some physical outposts. As it applies to the average retailer, let's take the Amazons and the Walmarts and all those guys out of the equation, because while they represent lots of dollars, they don't represent a lot of doors in retail. Most retailers are not the big guys. For the average retailer, you're not fighting every day necessarily against Amazon on price or selection or convenience. Frankly, you don't even want to go down that road. But you can create tremendous value for consumers. But the value, and I explained this in my last book, the value today really has to be across one of four different particular, what I call competitive quadrants. So you have to deliver value to the consumer either from a cultural standpoint. So you have to be seen as kind of the leader of a cause. So think about Patagonia, for example, in the outdoor clothing and equipment market. They've always put environmental protection at the center of the brand. Everything they do is aimed at being a force in that respect in terms of saving the planet. So they're a cultural leader, and people shop Patagonia because it makes them feel good, in addition to the fact that they sell quality things. You can also be a leader in entertainment. So you can provide, to the point about Apple, providing a more entertaining and enjoyable shopping experience by being able to engage with things and have fun. You can also go to retail because you know that you can only get so much information about this product online, but to really talk to somebody who's an expert, somebody who uses this stuff all the time and really knows the ins and outs, I'm going to go to this store and get that expert advice. And then the final quadrant is design. So you either have a fundamentally better designed product, and you could look at a brand like Dyson vacuum cleaners, or you've designed a new way for consumers to buy the things that you are selling. And I point to, as an example, a brand called Carvana, a used car company in the States that is now being sort of copied and emulated in Canada. But you can do the entire transaction, trade-in, financing, have your car delivered, and never set foot in a dealership. If a business can use their use their power to dominate in one of those four categories and use their stores strategically to fit into delivering that value to consumers, that is, I think, ultimately where we're going. If you're a retailer out there and you're selling things that other people sell, your prices are pretty much what their prices are. Your level of expertise is no better or worse than what somebody can find on the internet, and you don't really have a fun place to shop. You don't really stand for anything from a values or morals point. Why wouldn't I just order it from Amazon, right? Why would I even bother going to your store? And unfortunately, that's where about 60 to 70%, which is probably conservative, of all retailers are today. They get up in the morning and they go back to the grind, and it's just, discounts and promotions and trying to get consumers excited about things. So we're at a point where retailers really have to reclaim, like, why am I here? What value do I give to people that they can't find somewhere else? And how can I express that value to them through every single junction in the consumer journey with my brand? It's a tall order, but that's where we're at.
It's a tall order, but it's a challenge that you describe well as being the challenge ahead of retailers and real estate retail owners. And so I think that particularly if you're right that 60 to 70 to more percent are just that commodity like product, gosh, that is really a big challenge.
Largely undifferentiated. If I step back and look at Nike, in 2017, Mark Parker, who was then the CEO of Nike, got up at a conference, and the stock was trading at $51 at that time. Nike stock, $51 and declining. And he got up at that conference and he said a number of things, but among them was, he said, out of 30,000 retailers globally that we do business with, that Nike had made the decision to more closely partner with only 40 of those 30,000. The reason he cited was that, from his point of view, most retailers that Nike sold their products through were completely undifferentiated. They weren't giving consumers any sort of memorable or even pleasant experience. They weren't really representing the brand in a way that added equity to the Nike brand. If anything, they were just using the product as a commodity, in some cases to generate sales for other brands. So he basically said, we're not going to invest in that anymore. We're going to invest in these 40 partners that we really believe can deliver a great experience, and we're going to take all that other effort and resources and pour it into creating our own Nike locations. So, Mark Parker was essentially saying, out of 30,000 retailers, we believe that 40 have the differentiation and the willingness necessary to create a decent consumer experience. It's a bit of an indictment on the retail industry in general.
Sure is. We're going to take a break and come back in just 2 minutes with Doug Stevens, the Retail Prophet. Stay with us, everybody.
You bet.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm having a really interesting but frankly challenging conversation, challenging to retailers and to shopping center owners with Doug Stevens, who runs a consultancy called the Retail Prophet here in Toronto and consults, I think, internationally with retailers and shopping centers, shopping malls, etc. Doug, I got to ask you, a couple decades ago, I worked for the Walt Disney Company, and we were working on Pleasure Island and retail entertainment. You go to LA Live, you go to the shops at Don Mills, you go to Legacy West in Dallas, Texas, you go to some of the sort of the centers in Florida that are around a pond or a lagoon. They're effectively all trying to recreate main streets. What's the future of main streets? Are they going to be real main streets? Are they going to be artificial main streets? Are they going to not exist in the future?
It's a great question. And again, I think, the not just the safe answer, but I think the most accurate answer I can come up with to that question is that people will go where there is something to be gained. right? I mean, as human beings, we are going to go either to places where we feel we can get something that we can't find anywhere else, or we're going to get an experience, that we can't find anywhere else. People still walk the Champs-Élysées today because it's the Champs-Élysées, and there are things there that you can see and experience that you simply can't find anywhere else. Could say the same thing about Fifth Avenue in New York, or Orchard Road in Singapore, right? There are going to be places that consumers congregate. And I don't even like using the word consumer. Let's just call people, citizens, people. People will congregate in these places. A lot of it, I think, Brian, has to do with human energy. I was in Italy not that long ago, and my wife and I were sitting in a piazza in Bologna, Italy. And you look around, and what do you see? You see people who are maybe on their way to work, other people just sitting in the sun reading the newspaper. There might be someone playing a guitar, people just hanging out. But there's a human energy to the space. And we, as biological creatures, are drawn to that energy wherever it is. And that if that happens to be on the high street in London, or if it happens to be on Main Street in Keokuk, Iowa, people will go. And so I think that what has happened in many of these places through a number of different phenomenon, whether it's technology, or whether it's the economics of a particular place, but we've seen the energy sapped from a lot of these main streets. And so the question facing a lot of cities, and I was just on the phone with a Canadian city yesterday, who's experiencing this very thing in their downtown core. They're trying to find ways now to re-inject energy into these places, give people reasons to come that they might not have had over the last 5 or 10 years, and really create that sort of dynamic magnetism around certain places. It's not something that can just be manufactured. I don't think that unless people are at Disney World, they don't want to feel like they're being treated like they're at Disney World. I think we like things that are historically legitimate. I think we like things that feel organic and real, and that it's not just sort of performance. And sometimes that can be just by changing the mix of merchants on a main street, or providing places for people to sit and enjoy themselves and spend time, or giving them new experiences. One of the I'm sort of rambling here, but I think it's germane. What's interesting to me is when you go to the Grove. I'm not sure if you've ever been to the Grove in LA, but it's an outdoor shopping complex. There are two distinct components to the Grove. There's a farmer's market, which has been sort of an embedded feature of the Grove, and then there's the kind of the built environment, which is more like a kind of a Don Mills Center on steroids. Where you feel the most energy is in the farmer's market, and that really is the draw. It's what pulls you into the place, because beyond that, it's just kind of a normal shopping experience. But it's that market atmosphere that really creates the energy in the place. So the challenge ahead for cities is, in a world where product means nothing, where consumers have access to anything they want, how can you create a mix of tenancies in your downtown core that creates that sense of place and energy, and gives people the desire to want to spend time there? And it's not an easy fix, and it may take some trial and error, but it's just about reinventing this notion of space.
So I was in Dallas recently, and I met a developer, and he said that the new anchor is green space. Green space is the new anchor. Are you suggesting that the new anchor is a sense of place or entertainment?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the new anchor is the overall experience of being in a place. I think that is ultimately the draw, and it's about being able to do things, see things, taste things, touch things, experience things, and hear things that you couldn't do sitting at home on your sofa, right? If you can put that in a bottle, that lightning, that's what you need. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the development that you're working on has to conform to any particular set of criteria. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have one or two particular retailers, but the amalgam of everything that you put together, the built environment, the choices that you make in tenancies, the amount of space that you give people to just, sort of chill out and commune, all of that put together needs to create something where people want to spend time there. If I don't want to spend time there, it doesn't matter if you have a Lululemon or, any other brand, it's not going to draw me, but sometimes, people will say, why is it always that the grittiest part of cities usually become the places where, you have these top tier brands setting up shop? And I think it's because there's an authenticity and an energy to these places in the first place. People want to go there. People want to go to the meatpacking district in New York. They want to spend time there. And so, it's kind of the challenge for everyone in the retail industry today is, how do we create that same sense of need and desire to be in our space?
Excellent conversation. We're going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments with Doug Stephens, the retail prophet, in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Mm-hmm. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm having a really interesting conversation with Doug Stephens tonight. He runs a retail consultancy called The Retail Prophet. Doug, I got to ask you, almost every other person at the conference that you and I were at last week commented about ESG. I don't think you commented about environment, society, or social and governance at all. Is that just a passing trend, or is it something important? You mentioned Patagonia. What do you think consumers think about ESG? Is it really important?
Well, I'll tell you what the research suggests, and that is that it is of growing importance, and it is of greater importance to younger consumers than older consumers, which is probably not going to come as any huge surprise. I would say though that we still battle the same old thing that we often do in research, and that's that consumers often say one thing and they do another. So while the average 26-year-old may say that, when I shop, the most important thing to me is the planet and the environment, it is also the fact that one of the fastest growing brands today is a brand called Shein, which is a Chinese e-commerce retailer that sells the cheapest of the cheap in terms of clothing. They are by no means the poster child for environmental consciousness or responsibility, and yet they are a huge success with younger consumers. So there's still a bit of a schism. But I would say, though, that we're seeing greater and greater research, greater amounts of research that suggests that consumers are indeed predicating more and more buying decisions today on these factors, whether it's localism, whether it's the natural elements of a product or the health benefits of a product, whether it's the recyclability or the fact that it's made of regenerative materials, or that the people who made the thing are paid a living wage. Now, to put some of this stuff in perspective, and this is maybe a final invocation for retailers writ large. Right now, as we speak, there are somewhere in the range of 10 million tons of plastic under the surface of the ocean that just floats around.
10 million tons.
10 million tons, yeah. 90% of all plastic that has ever been manufactured in the course of human history still exists today. If we turn to the human element, the average garment worker in Pakistan who may have made this sweater, I'm not sure, gets paid about $100 a month US for working at least 40 hours a week in what are often grueling conditions. So, the retail industry, whether by accident or by purposeful behavior, has really done a lot of damage to the world. And our ravenous consumption of products and the need for more and more and more has only contributed to the problem. So it is a massive opportunity for businesses not only to do a better job of being stewards for the planet and the people that live on it, but it is also being proven that companies that do strike out with a very clear social or environmental purpose actually perform better financially. Their sales are better, their consumer loyalty is better, and the consumer advocacy of their brand is better. So their profitability and sales are better. So it's not just a good thing to do for the planet. It's good business.
Doing a good thing for the planet is good for business. Well, that's interesting. I got to tell you one last comment. I interviewed a supposed fashion expert who told me that this Chinese company you mentioned actually produces fast fashion, not for people to wear out, but just to wear for their Instagram pictures.
Yeah, very often, yeah. And that is part of the reason, young consumers find themselves in a bit of a jam. Because on the one hand, social media has really prompted the need, because we take so many photos of everywhere we go, it's prompted the need for people, at least the perception, that they need more clothing today. On the other hand, you're also talking in many cases about younger consumers who don't necessarily have the economic stability or the free income to just go buy more and more and more. So how has retail responded? Well, we'll just take the cost of a t-shirt from $20 down to $7 and see if that works. And we've just gone farther and farther afield to find the labor forces that are willing to work in what is, if we're being honest, a form of slavery to produce these goods. And it is time to start reversing some of these trends.
Doug Stevens, excellent conversation. Really appreciate it. If people want to check you out, follow you, I guess they can buy your book, available on Amazon, I presume.
Available on Amazon or at your local bookstore.
At a local bookstore.
Or just go to retailprofit.com. It's all there.
Excellent. Really appreciate your time, sir.
My pleasure, Brian. Thanks for having me.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks for joining us, everybody. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Pakistan or Thailand or downtown Toronto at www.saga960am.ca. Good night, everybody.